little bit of economics in order to see how this historically happened. Now, as you probably know from reading your Constitution, that Congress has the authority to coin money, which is gold or silver, and that's what a constitutional money system comprises. The Founding Fathers were pretty smart about a number of things, and that was one thing. They knew that as soon as they issued paper money substitutes or created a national banking system, it wouldn't be very long before the international bankers were controlling not only the government but the economic system. And so that's why they put us on a gold standard and made it a constitutional standard. When the Constitution was first created, it was created as an ultra-sovereign canon law trust. All governments, nation states, and sovereign powers operate within trust structures. All of them. We can also operate in trust structures, and we'll talk about trusts in a little bit. But the original ultra-sovereign canon law trust was merged from both the common law of the Constitution and England, but also the canon laws from the Pope, when the ultra-sovereign canon law trust was created in 1776. And we, the people, were the trustees of that trust up until 1913. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act created a joint stock trust that replaced the ultra-sovereign canon law trust and made we, the international bankers, as the trustees of that trust, and assigned the U.S. citizens as beneficiaries of the trust. The trust structure that existed in 1776 was replaced with another one. That's called a coup d'etat under law. It was done by law. It was done legally. Okay? All of this usurpation has happened legally. Not lawfully, legally. And so the status of we the people was reversed from the top at the helm to the bottom, which is getting the handouts, basically. Free lunches, food stamps, welfare, whatever, civil rights, whatever we want to hand you guys. Now, it all seems like a great idea to be the beneficiary of a trust, doesn't it? Sound like, wow, I'm going to really cash in, aren't I? Being the beneficiary of a trust. Well, unfortunately, the only thing you're going to cash in on is an obligation to pay the debt. Prior to 1913, the American people had direct veto power against spending policies of the federal government, because in order for the federal government to borrow any money, it had to go to the people. There was no central bank it could go to. It had to sell bonds. If you didn't want to go to war, you didn't buy the bonds. If you didn't want this pork project that the government had in mind, you didn't buy the bonds. It was a very simple system, a Republican system whereby you had veto power, economic veto power. And it worked very well until 1913. That's how come government managed to stay small, because it didn't have an unlimited credit line to go on a shopping spree for 80 years and make you pay for it. So in 1913, there was this convenient new arrangement made. The Federal Reserve Act created an unlimited credit line for the federal United States government to borrow directly from the Federal Reserve Bank, and obligated the American people to pay it back, completely bypassing what was our veto power, and they no longer had to come to us directly to ask permission to fund something. They went directly to the bank. Now, if you go to the bank and want to borrow some money, what do you got to do? You got to put collateral up, right? They're not going to give you a $5,000 loan if you have no collateral, if it's unsecured. You're going to have to put up your house, your car, or your land or something, right? Well, it's no different for the government, except the government doesn't have any assets. That's the difference. And so instead of putting up the assets they didn't have, they put up your assets. They said, here, we'll make you a deal. You lend us all the money, and we're going to collateralize first the gold, and then the land, and then the corporations, then the national parks and forests, then the birth certificates, until we've collateralized all the tangible property in the United States of America. The first thing they collateralized against the debt in 1913 was the gold. It's called hypothecate. It's a legal term, means that theoretically, if you can't pay it off, hardy har har, we're going to take the collateral, which they did in 1933. It only took 17 years under this new arrangement for the federal United States to go bankrupt the first time. Only 17 years before they couldn't service the debt, the interest on the debt of the money that they had borrowed. And so they had to declare bankruptcy in the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1913. pardon me, 1930, 16 nations went bankrupt after World War I. And this was one of them, the United States, federal United States. And so when the country went bankrupt, it precipitated the Great Depression, which was also manipulated and created by the international bankers to demoralize the people, number one, but also to shift power away from the sovereign people, to shift the land away, and to shift the gold away from the people and into the hands of the international bankers and the sovereign power structures behind them. So in 1933, with House Joint Resolution 192, on the floor of Congress, the federal United States declared bankruptcy and no longer could service debt with gold because it had no more. And so it then made what we call now legal tender, or fiat money, a money paper substitute, and then decreed that, well, since we don't have any gold, we'll just have to use paper instead. And then they passed the Gold Standard Act in 1935 and confiscated all the gold from the American people to satisfy the creditors of the United States. And the people willingly handed all their gold over to the nearest Federal Reserve Bank and initially got a paper currency that was redeemable in gold or silver at a revaluation from 1/20th of an ounce to 1/35th of an ounce. But shortly thereafter, within a matter of a couple of years, you no longer could redeem it. So you basically traded